Hi listeners and welcome to the latest episode of the Fantasy Animation Podcast with me, Chris Holliday.
And me, Alex Sargent.
We are finally tackling in this episode, Alex, the work of the Leeds Animation Workshop. So we've had blog entries on the workshop. We've probably, I think, mentioned them in passing. So we're delighted to finally devote an extended period of time to working through some of their films, which I'm sure listeners will know. Talk a little bit about the sort of navigation of kind of quite serious issues, I think, around gender and we'll go into this in more detail, I think, but there's a real power to these films that I'd really like to interrogate. Obviously, from an animation perspective, I think we can definitely go into kind of style. We can go into animation as an accessible medium, useful animation, kind of pedagogical function, and also animation as a medium that can help provoke, I think, and whether that knife edge that it sits on amplification versus dilution. This is something our students talk a lot about, animation's ability to kind of hold or capture important subject matter. So really excited. Alex, fantasy?
Yeah, well, also I get to play the complete Luddite once again on the podcast because I'm being introduced to this for the first time, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the story from our guest. The examples that we watched were all the things you said, but also they were witty, jovial, imaginative, all the words that I kind of look for when I'm looking for kind of fantastical stuff, so excited to unpack them as well. Yes,
and we are delighted... really delighted to be joined by a very special guest to kind of hold our hand through these films. So we're delighted to be joined by Terry Wragg, who is one of the founding members of the Leeds Animation Workshop, a women's cooperative established in 1978, set up to produce and distribute animated films on a number of social issues, equality, gender and sexuality, but also family crises, prison, disability, global justice, climate change. The workshop also offers regional resources for film exhibition, education and training, and remains an independent, not-for-profit cooperative. It has made, and we won't be able to do justice to it in the time that we've got, but it's made around 40 films that are distributed throughout the UK and around the world. So we're very delighted to have you. Thank you ever so much, Terry, for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I think the number of films has gone up to around 50 now.
Excellent. Well, there we go then.
We're still going.
So I suppose, as I said, we're not going to be able to do justice to sort of the Leeds Animation Workshop. But I suppose for listeners who perhaps are unfamiliar or listeners who have maybe heard of the Leeds Animation Workshop, could you give us, I suppose, a sort of sense of how it sort of came about and its aims, I suppose, beyond what I've already described?
Well, Chris, it's about politics. We got together because we were a group of feminists who were all active in the women's movement in Leeds. And one of the demands of the women's liberation movement early on, one of the first demands from their first conference in this country in 1970 was free childcare. Free 24-hour childcare, I think they asked for. Free 24-hour childcare they asked for. And so we set about making a film to express the need for nurseries. And we were called the Nursery Film Group. And when that film was finished, and it actually worked, because, it was in the 70s. You couldn't tell whether anything was working for quite a long time after you'd animated it. It's not like now you can play it back. You had to wait a week to just sort of see the little clip that you just had shot and processed and everything. When we actually found that it had worked, we had made a real film. People were really watching it on screens around the country. We thought, this was a good idea. Let's make some more. Yeah. So at that point, we changed our name from Leeds Nursery Film Group to Leeds Animation Workshop. We don't use the definite article usually when talking about it, but it was just because we were in Leeds. We were going to make stuff in animation, and we were a workshop because there was a movement of radical film collectives around the country. There were theatre workshops, there were artist workshops. It was the time of the coming of age of the dreaded boomers, you know, who, because there were loads of us, we were a big generation, a bulge in the population graphs after the war when all the soldiers came home. And so there was loads of us. We outnumbered all previous generations on the planet. And our parents had fought World War II, and they were all still traumatised when we were grown up. They didn't start to talk about their war experiences until we were all old, you know. They were traumatised, and they were emotionally distant in most cases. They were very keen to hold on to old things, that, you know, any kind of familiarity that made them feel safe. And so we grew up in a world that was fuddy-duddy, antiquated, restrictive, oppressive, emotionally rather joyless and cold in many cases. And we wanted to change this world. You know, we were fed up of everything being, during the war it was like this, before the war it was like that. We wanted to get away from the war. We wanted to get beyond war. We wanted to have a world where there was more freedom, less oppression, less war. We wanted peace and love, man, you know. And we were all founding collectives and workshops and ways of doing things differently.
Yeah. So you made an animation. So I guess I'm interested in unpacking the "so" in that sentence. So were you artists first? Did the politics come after the art? Did the art come through the politics? How did we get to that point as well?
I joined in when the project had already begun, because the project kind of began in London. One of the radical theatre workshops was Red Ladder Workshop, which had moved up from London to Leeds. And there were a couple of women as well who both had experience of animation in London and of being professional artists in some way in London. I mean, you couldn't do things like that in Leeds. When I was 5, they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be an artist when I grow up." And they said, "Don't be silly. Nobody does anything like that around here." So I've actually ended up spending half a century working in art and writing. However, so this project had actually been set up under the Greater London Arts Association, but don't tell them, but it actually then moved to Leeds and got some more funding from Yorkshire Arts Association and various other people. And, you know, as I say, a group of us all met through politics, through women's politics particularly. And, so a bunch of us that had never, enjoyed doing art in their childhood or in their present even, but didn't have any professional experience in it, just joined in because they needed people to, there were a couple of women there who were doing animation on cell, so they were doing drawings, then they were tracing them onto cell, then the cells. This is for people that weren't born yet. The cells were then turned over and painted on the other side, and that is a long job. Typically in all the studios like Disney, everything like that. It was always the blokes that would do the drawings and animating, and then it would be the women that were in the paint and trace department. So there'd be aircraft hangars, literally aircraft hangars full of women doing paint and trace, and a few officers with blokes doing animation. But we had a room at the top of market buildings in Leeds, and we were all in the same room. And so there were couple of women doing the drawings and the tracings, because it was all being done with rotoring pens.
Yeah.
And, you know, a constant need for other people to come and paint the backs of the cells. So that's how it worked. And eventually, some of us learned to do some tracing and in-betweening as well. And yeah, eventually we moved on to other forms of other techniques of animation.
Yeah. I'm really interested in, as I said at the start, when I chat with students who are not practitioners, they are kind of theorists and we write and you know, I make them read lots of things. But that we have a discussion, or there's a week where we talk about animation's relationship to sort of politics. And you said right at the start that it's all politics, you know, that's where it kind of comes from. And I've heard you mention before the art of animation being kind of accessible. That on the one hand, there's a process that you described, but there's also, you know, lots of people, you know, pen and paper, and people can animate and draw, but at the same time, it kind of embroiled within that is the subject matter that one wants to express, kind of what you were saying, Alex, this subject matter that you want to express, and then animation being the best vessel for that, or the most accessible vessel for that. And I've heard you speak before about, you know, animation, and we mentioned this on the podcast before, animation being this kind of, it works in symbols and suggestion. You don't need absolute detail. You can have a sort of suggestive understanding of space and, you know, windows, floor. You can give a sense of space. So I just wondered, was there ever a discussion, I mean, maybe this is not really a good question to ask, but was there a sort of discussion about animation's ability to sort of be a medium that could articulate some of the concerns of the films that you ended up making? Because I think my students are always interested in whether it has this, animation can amplify the subject by virtue of its animatedness, or whether it sort of detracts or dilutes because of its animatedness. So I'm just really interested on that knife edge on which animation sits, being something that can amplify and make palatable, maybe, if that's the right word. But it can also, you know, perhaps have the opposite. I don't know, I'm just really interested in this knife edge, because I've heard you speak about animation as an accessible medium. Yeah,
when you say, was there ever a discussion? When you're doing cell animation, you're all stuck in a room for years.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
You do nothing else but discuss.
Sure.
Yeah.
And actually, that's one of the things that I miss now. We do less we hardly do any cell animation. There aren't those endless afternoons with a brush in one hand and a paint pot in the other, when all you're doing is chatting and talking and discussing. So yeah, I mean, it was part of the raison d'etre, was to make, was that we wanted to make films that were accessible, and that we were aware that animation, you know, stroke cartoons were kind of by definition accessible. I mean, you know, I suppose hence people often think of animation as something for children. But yeah, skip that debate for now. But
that's come up on the podcast before. Everyone is interested in hearing it.
Sure. Turns out it's not. Anyway,
I'm sure it has. But yeah, so yeah, we wanted to be accessible. I mean, these are the days of the London Filmmakers Co-op, right? Respect to London Filmmakers Co-op. But if you'd have shown any film by London Filmmakers Co-op to the average person in Leeds, they would have either fallen over laughing or just glazed over and gone to sleep. You know, those films were not what we saw as accessible. And, you know, I've since learned a lot from them, and I love them and everything. But in the 70s, we were more interested in, you know, agitprop theatre was what our mates were doing. And I suppose in a way we were kind of aiming for something like agitprop film. We wanted something that would be accessible by a wide range of people. One of the key animators if not both of the key animators on our first films were referencing Andy Capp as, one of their key things to aspire to. Andy Capp was a cartoon in the Daily Mirror. It was a classic, easy way to communicate with anybody with, whatever their reading age or educational background. Andy Capp would sort of get a message across, make you laugh, and be undemanding. And that's kind of what we were aiming to do, I guess.
Yeah. Was because obviously with Andy Capp, class is really important to the construction of.
Also.
So is that also feeding into?
Yes, very much so. Yeah. I mean, I suppose that was one of the things about the difference between the people we saw as our audience and the people. I mean, I say the people that the avant-garde filmmakers saw as their audience. Although I remember once having a conversation in a taxi going home from a avant-garde film screening in the 70s and saying to the filmmaker, "So who do you see as your audience for this film?" And she went, "Oh, audience, I never thought about that." And that was a real moment of revelation to me, the idea that you would make a film without thinking who the audience was. I mean, I suppose particularly for animators, because you spend years making the blinking thing, you're doing it to get to an audience, you're doing it to get a message across to people, and that was at the forefront of our minds all the time. Was, is this scene something that people will understand? Will this line get the message across? And so, that was very...
But I suppose, was there, in terms of getting that message across, was there a, again, maybe it's the wrong question, but was there a worry that the animation would it can enable the way that the message comes across by for the reason that all the things that you just said, but also there's a risk that it could get in the way? And you might, there's
the perceptions of animation as this childlike medium might
you're kind of fighting against
the
that,
seriousness of the message.
Yeah, you're kind of fighting against these.
Or was that part of what you were trying to consider? Like, there's a part of what we want to do is do something with animation here as well.
Yeah.
We didn't really worry too much about, our film being shown exclusively to the under 10s.
No.
I suppose also as well as having an idea of who our audience was, we also knew who our distribution network was, right? Because we knew our whole aim was to make a tool for the women's movement and for the campaign to have more nurseries. Whatever film we were making a tool for campaigners and for educators and, obviously for individuals too. But we knew who our audience was and we knew how to get to our audience. I suppose that was it. We weren't going to try and get it on telly or anything. We were activists. We were union members. We knew how these things worked. You take a projector to the meeting and you show a film, and that's how it works. And we knew that there were other people around the country, around the continent, doing the same thing.
Yeah. So before we come to our first example that we're going to talk about, I just would like to get a sense of, because it sounds like the workshop's gone through a number of different iterations and different funding models and different ways of distributing it. So if we call this like kind of the first wave throughout the sort of late 70s into the 80s, how is this working then? Are social organisations contacting you with films they would like to make? Are you selecting the films yourself in terms of the next cause you'd like to take up? And how is I guess, to ask the grubby question, how is this being paid for in terms of all the time you're having to devote to making these very labour-intensive projects?
Well, it's a mixture of all of those things, really. So the first film we began as Leeds Animation Workshop was actually one about health and safety at work, which arose out of the fact that I had a 1 day a week job as a trade union health and safety at work teacher. And so I had inside information that the Health and Safety at Work Act was just about to come into force, and I'd seen all the films that existed because I've been on training courses. I knew that the films that were available about health and safety at work were all from the boss's point of view, from management point of view. So they were all about things like, don't forget to put on your helmet, and it's your fault to, if you're not wearing your safety boots, it's your fault your foot got chopped off.
Sure.
Things like that. So I knew that the trade union line on health and safety at work was very different, and we made probably the first film that was made from the union point of view, from the workers' point of view, about health and safety at work. And so we got in touch with ROSPA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, and got a tiny contribution from them, I think. We also, because we were the kind of organisation we went to Yorkshire Arts, and we applied to people that wanted the film made. We applied to people who wanted any film made. We applied to people that wanted films made in Yorkshire, all of those kind of things.
Yeah. So
and then the next film that came after that was because that came about because we were involved in campaigning against nuclear power and nuclear weapons. So I think I wasn't the only one. I think several of us who got together through the workshop, our first political experience was as young teenagers going on CND demonstrations in the 50s to early 60s, which was a big time for CND demonstrations. Campaign for nuclear disarmament was very important then. And then there was a kind of a revitalisation of that campaign around 1980. There was a new campaign called END, the European Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and we went to events organised by END and said, we're thinking of making a film to support the work of the campaign. Do you think that's a good idea? They said yes, so we went for it. And we didn't have very much funding for that at all. But we promoted it through publications like Peace News or, all the other publications that we knew about, subscribed to, just said, any donations welcome. And we got checks and postal orders from all over the country, from £5 or £10 from little radical groups saying, yes, we want a film that will help us promote the cause of anti-nuclear stuff. Yeah. So, we got literally loads of donations. We scraped together a very, very low budget. One of the donations came from Concord. What was it called? It's now called Concord Media, but at the time I think it was called something like Concord Peace Council. And they put some money into Pretend You'll Survive. I think they put £150 in, or it might have been 300. I can't remember. But we still got the contract somewhere where they said, we will donate this to you and we will take it back in royalties when we're distributing it. And they did make it back in royalties in a few years, and they still distribute it. So and they've distributed almost everything else that we do since, but we distribute it too. Okay, so come to us first if you ever want to use any of our films.
Excellent. I'm interested. I suppose this maybe is a good segue into the first example, but talking about sort of the difference between in some of the films, this kind of instructional, the safety video, for example, the idea that this is a bottom-up, quote-unquote, way of thinking about safety rather than it's your own fault. You're not wearing the right shoes when your foot gets cut off. Focusing on unions. And all of these are embodied. I think one of the striking things about the Leeds Animation Workshop is that these are embodied through protagonists that, again, in the broadest sense of the word, one normally doesn't see in animated films. So it's quite interesting that some of these, through, there are stylistic elements, the form, narrational strategies, uses of voiceover. We're talking about these as animation when, of course, there are different media being used. There are newspaper headlines in some cases. There are different kind of painterly styles, certainly in one of the later examples, but also live action shots, let's say, or photographs. So these are animation, but they're also mixing media in lots and lots of different ways. But I'm always struck by, the different kinds of, how kind of social justice is embodied through different kinds of protagonists. And obviously, the animation has these narratives that surround it with regards to as a medium for children, which we all know isn't true, and we don't need to talk about that. But that then becomes filtered through the same kinds of stories, the same kinds of characters, the relationship that animation has to the musical and different kinds of genres, fantasy. But here, these films are using fantasy in a different way. I think certainly the first example, Give Us a Smile, so we could maybe go into that one. Fantasy is being used in a slightly different way. Trauma is being used in a slightly different way. So I think one of the things that always strikes me is the experience that the idea of social justice is filtered or embodied through a character that one normally wouldn't see, if that makes sense, in animation or expect to see.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, one of our early films was commissioned by Sheffield City Council to encourage people to vote in local government elections. So we made this film about local democracy. And our research began at the dustbin depot and proceeded to when we went and spoke to the team of cleaners at Sheffield Town Hall. And those cleaners at Sheffield Town Hall, we had quite a long chat with them, and they were actually really inspiring. The seriousness with which they took their job, the sense of responsibility that they had, the fact that they worked in government offices. They said, these councillors, they leave confidential papers lying around all over their desks, all sorts of really important information just lying around. We pick it up and tidy it up and make sure it's all put away in the right place, because it was important to them. Their role was important to them. They took it very responsibly. And so when we made the film, the main character is a cleaner in the town hall. And she is the one who explains the role and the importance of local democracy throughout the film. It's useful. It was important to us in several ways to do that kind of narrative. Yeah.
Well, that's where the Andy Capp kind of class thing was chiming with me when kind of thinking about whose stories get to be told and perspective and stuff like this. But we can try and tackle.
Tell us about then. Give Us a Smile. How did that project come?
So this is 83.
Into fruition and what were the aims?
Okay. So when we finished Pretend You'll Survive, it got shown at London Film Festival. That turned out to be, a ticket to the future. Because once you've been in London Film Festival, they take you a lot more seriously, the funders. I mean, previously we tried to talk to funders in London and they kind of laughed in our face a bit. But there's an apocryphal story that our first letter about this film ended up in the waste paper basket and that Esther Ranson fished it out. But anyway, that's apocryphal. It probably didn't happen, but it might have done. So once we'd had a film in London Film Festival, we felt more confident in applying to them for our next film, which was what we really been wanting to make, I guess, all the time without even consciously thinking about it. We wanted to make a film about what it's like being a woman.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of strands to this. One was having grown up as women.
Yeah.
One was having lived in Leeds during the years when women were basically under curfew because there was a mass murderer around for quite a lot of years,
Yeah.
roaming West Yorkshire and murdering women. And so for a very long time, you were told not to go out on your own at night, all that sort of thing. By now, we were part of a movement, the National Organisation of Film Workshops, with all the other film workshops like ours that were growing up around the country. And at some point, we all managed to get an agreement with the funding organisations, with people like the BFI, all the regional arts associations, and Channel 4, and all the workshops and the Independent Film and Video Association got together and worked out a way of working, a way of supporting our work and enabling our work, which involved us being able to work the way we wanted, i.e. cross-grade working. We were all allowed to do all the jobs in all our film workshops. We were all allowed to get equal pay.
Yeah.
We were all allowed, which is the way we wanted to work. But if you worked in telly, which is what most of the people in our union were working in TV, and they all had infinitesimal gradations of their job descriptions, which were, you're allowed to pull focus, but you weren't allowed to sweep the floor or whatever. And it was all about hierarchies, and that was exactly what we wanted to get away from.
Yeah.
It also allowed us to keep copyright of our work, which is a very important thing. So this was as I say, it was part of a movement of new ways of working in film. And so there were, by the early 80s, there were more and more film workshops growing up around the country. Channel 4 had just started, and that enabled some of the workshops to get a bit more funding. We were receiving funding from the British Film Institute at that time. And that was really helpful because once they'd accepted that you were a film workshop, there was an agreement that you would be working in 4 different areas: production, distribution, exhibition, and education. So the fact that we were making a film was important of itself, but they weren't kind of going through our script with a fine-tooth comb, right? So we knew that we had editorial freedom, and we thought we might never have this opportunity again of funding that will see us through the next couple of years, and freedom to say whatever we want. We're going to throw everything we can at sexism with this project. And we did. And we spent a lot of time reading everything we could. A lot of the material we already knew about just through having been alive, and we really tried to put everything we could into it. It included like everything that was around us all the time, all the imagery that was around you all the time, the posters on the advertising hoardings, the newspaper articles, the cartoons. Cartoons were actually important as well, because as people who worked in the world of cartoons, we were very aware of the fact that cartoons could be more transgressive. They were sort of a gateway drug for pornography and sexism in live action images, actually. We spent half a day in the Postcard Museum in West Yorkshire, where they had a collection of all the seaside postcards.
Yes.
We pinned them in the background because during this film, because we wanted to show that this was real, all the things that were put into male characters' mouths throughout the film were real quotations. And we made some of the shots were live action shots, but we wanted to treat them as quotations in an animated film. We didn't want to just have live action in the sense that, you know, you put a camera somewhere and push a button and leave it rolling. We wanted to have very carefully framed and disciplined live action shots.
Yes.
And we pinned one or two of these postcards on the wall in the shot where we've got policemen doing an interview with a rape victim, just as kind of, you know, background information. And throughout the film, we got quotations, visual quotations, which are cutouts from lads' magazines, Playboy, etc. Which are just sort of little black and white cartoons in the background to sort of express the feeling that this is part of the atmosphere that you're growing up in all the time.
Yeah, well, and that mixed media-ness of the film, definitely, obviously, when you say you threw everything at the subject matter, I think what I really liked is the alignment of and the long tail of these kinds of images. So the famous poster of the tennis player, with the lifted skirt, sits alongside kind of, I think, kind of Renaissance art, and this kind of corny cooperative, all these different. What's the word?
Stereotype.
But I suppose the multimedia environment of what you're trying to. That this is a pervasive, and I love the idea that cartoons, these kind of quote unquote innocuous, bawdy cartoons that you would find, or drawn images that you find on postcards, being this gateway drug to something a lot more serious. But the alignment of those kinds of different kinds of media suggests that this is all one and the same. You know, this kind of sexism and women's experiences of street harassment are in different sites, in different spaces, communicated through different types of media, and that visual energy, I think, is matched in the way that the film is. It's animation, but as you say, it has these very disciplined, faceless images of the police, and it has all this, this kind of energy of mixed media. So it's really about the sort of burden of certainly the way that some of the quotes work, the burden of prevention is placed on a woman rather than anything else. But the saturation of all of this this imagery and the alignment of the kind of everyday, the banal. This is what I'm really interested in when I talk to my students about the banal everyday, and the fact that these are kind of quotidian images that just circulate and they become their potencies, that they're like air. You breathe them in all the time, but you're not aware of them. They're just sort of there. So I think this is that I love the idea of the everyday cartoon or these kinds of images being this gateway into a broader media culture, but also culture in general that's doing what it's doing. Alex.
Well, let's not sit here and explain the film to you, Terry. But just to jump on Chris's point, I wondered if this was a conscious intent or just something I picked up on the movie. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about was that what Chris was saying with that mixed media. There's also this sense of what the animation is doing in terms of the animation you're making and creating. And there's this moment in the movie that very struck me where the clippings, the kind of photos of women in these magazines are kind of used in the background for the first time within the animation that we've been watching up at this point of this woman receiving this harassment. And by now we're quite aligned to kind of see that as the mimetic representation of reality, right? So we're watching the animation tell the story of this woman's day, and we get these images in the background that are suddenly not every day because they're the photorealistic images. So the effect of it, at least to me watching, was it made these photos look cartoonish. The cartoon isn't the cartoon. The cartoon is the thing we should be aligning with. The
photographs the caricatured reality.
Are the caricatures,
Yeah.
even though they don't look like caricatures to a lot of people. In part of what you're trying to do is punctuate that. Was that conscious, or was that just something unreal? Okay.
Yes, it was part of aligning reality with our cartoon. That's what it was, I guess.
Yes, exactly, right. So and it's about changing a perception of reality then, right? So it's no longer this kind of everyday, to notice things that aren't noticed, that you are noticing.
Yeah, to point up those things that are part of a woman's life that not all men might perhaps recognise. Yeah. But also to say, this is real. What we're talking about here is reality. And aligning our animation with these real things, and we bring in collaged collections of newspaper headlines. A couple of times, you wouldn't find any woman quoted as a simple quote. It would always be, in terms of, whether they were blonde or brunette, what their vital statistics were, whether they were a bimbo or a granny. All of that would be the most important thing about any woman mentioned in a newspaper. And so obviously that was one of the things that we were critiquing in the film. And ironically, when the BFI decided to give us a grant, it was one of their programme of grants for the year, and they published a press release and sent it out around the country. Oh yeah, these are the projects that the BFI is funding this year. And the Yorkshire Post obviously received this, Yorkshire Evening Post I'm talking about, and they obviously looked for local recipients of grants, and they picked up on the fact that we were making a cartoon and that there was a connection to having lived through the years of the mass murders of women in Yorkshire, and they put on their placards, Leeds fun film about the Ripper. And their front page story was an interview with the mother of one of the women murdered by Peter Sutcliffe. And I think after that we wouldn't speak to a mainstream reporter for several years. But it's so much a case in point, about how animation is seen. If it's an animation film, then it must be a fun film. If it's a cartoon, it must be making jokes.
This is the thing. This is the sort of thing that you're fighting against. You're also fighting against the medium that has these ingrained associations, and we can talk about them quite sort of flippantly, I think, in the case of Disney and films where you go to talks and they say, well, it's not just a medium for children. But here it's actually, this is where that debate is actually the most important to be had. This is not just a playful way to start a talk on animation or to start a podcast on animation where you say, yes, it's considered a medium for children, but it's so much more than that. Fine. In this case, this is a really important part of that narrative, that actually the assumptions that animation is a medium for children is actively shaping in quite damaging ways the reception of films that are anything but part of these stories. So this is where that debate, which I think can get a bit tired in the way that you're constantly, yes, it's not for children, and also it's often used as a way into a conversation when actually we know it's not for children. It's sort of always obvious. This to me seems like the context in which it's really important to address the really damaging role that those kinds of debates are having, where you're trying to raise awareness or talk through some of these experiences, embodied experiences for people that are being diverted by these media narratives that animation is just this this fun aesthetic that dilutes everything that it touches.
Oh, absolutely. And, that was the narrative on the front page of the Yorkshire Evening Post was, we've just learned that a group in Leeds is about to make a cartoon, a fun cartoon about the murders. What is your response to that? And of course, the response was, oh, that's terrible. It should be stopped or something like that. Yeah. And I should probably mention that Give Us a Smile has a certificate for 15 from the British Board of Film Censors.
Interesting. Yeah. No, we're not going to explain the film to you, but I think everyone should go and, if they haven't already,
and we'll put a link.
We certainly will, yes.
To where you can find these trailers for it and things like that. And you can get it on the website, which we'll also put a link to. Is that right? You can get it on the Leeds Animation Workshop.
You can see a link. You can see an extract.
And potentially get the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're now going to ask you to do something absolutely impossible, but we're going to ask you to do it anyway, which is to bridge the gap between 1983, Give Us a Smile, and, ironically, bridging the gap, 2001. So if you could tell us whatever we need to know to get listeners who aren't familiar with this story to 2001 and where we're at when we're making this film that we're going to talk about next.
Okay, well, if I can just pick up the story after Give Us a Smile.
Yes.
We were able to access funding from the BFI for a few more years, and we knew it wouldn't be very many years. And the next film that we made with that grant was when we thought, oh gosh, we have thrown everything we can at sexism. Now let's try and throw everything we can at racism, because that was also a very big part of our lives. We were living in Chapeltown in Leeds, which is a very multiracial area. We knew the kind of experiences that people were having, a lot of black people in our area were having with the police, and not just the police, with other residents. And we wanted to put that down on film in a similar way. New strategy for new hard economic times. We started trying to make up animation pictures and pitching them to places like Channel 4. And then I went to a talk at some festival or conference somewhere. I went to a talk by a Channel 4 commissioning editor who explained how much his budget was and how many slots there were on Channel 4 for animation, not counting children's cartoon series, but for actual serious animation for grown-ups. I think he had, one slot late at night, not a prime time slot, at 30 minutes max. And that, the number of commissions that it was possible to get to make an animated film for TV was so laughably small. And he said the number of pictures that he got sent, the number of applications that he was sent, was something like 300 a week from animators trying to get their work on telly. And at this point, I thought, we're not even going to try to pitch anything. I think we did get one commission from Channel 4 during that 10-year period. But we turned our attention elsewhere, and we thought, okay, the films we make are films with a message, so we have to find the people who want that message to be put across. And there are people who are paying for advertising or paying for some means of getting their message across, and we'll target those people. And I think we look back at Risky Business, our film about health and safety at work, and thought, that was all set in a factory, and there's very little factory work around these days. Everyone works in offices now. Maybe we should try and do an update of Risky Business 10 years on. And I think this is before the days of Google, but a quick search revealed that, by non-Google methods, that it was European Year of Health and Safety at Work was just coming up. And sure enough, good old European Commission, I guess it was giving out grants for people promoting health and safety at work in Europe. And so we made All Stressed Up about stress at work.
Okay. What year was this?
All Stressed Up, I think it was maybe 91.
Okay.
I could look it up, sorry.
No. And then how...
It's the early 90s.
Is that how then the funding model evolved, is that you're now just going kind of piecemeal, project by project? That was the only way to go, was project by project. So everything had to become more streamlined. We could no longer... we could no longer be so relaxed about, we're going to put on free screenings, free workshops as part of our regular work. Everything had to be budgeted much more tightly from the beginning of a project to the end of a project. And another aspect of this was that we started to define our own roles in a more specific way. So during this decade, we kept identifying funds that aligned with our aims, and going for those. So I think it must have been in the mid-90s. One of our aims was, we were already aware of global warming and climate change, and how this was a very big thing, although it wasn't being talked about yet in the media. And we found out that there was a fund in Europe, again, called the SAVE Fund, that was about ways of combating global warming. In order to apply for this fund, you had to tell them how many tons of CO2 your project would save. Luckily, we had friends in the engineering industry that did some of these sums for us. So the last film you made was seen by X thousand people. So if the same number of 1,000 people each went home and changed a light bulb to energy-saving light bulb after watching your film, that would save X tons of CO2. So we wrote an application along these lines, got funding to make waste watchers. So that was one of these kind of films. And there was also a series of fairy tale films that we made around this time, again, because the European Union, I can't remember if it's the European Union or the European Commission, but anyway, Europe funded a series of films about, or part funded at least, a series of films about equality at work. Then getting funding from Europe became more and more complicated. You had to have more and more restrictions, like you had to have not just a series of European partners, but a series of European partners from the south of Europe, and from, it just became much more difficult to fill in the forms if you were not a city council with several people working full-time at funding applications. But we found that, by this time there was a Labour government, and they had a new policy of addressing crime, not by punishing criminals, but by looking into the causes of crime and putting on parenting education classes. So bridging the gap was part of this strategy of educating parents
so that their kids wouldn't grow up to be young offenders. So I think at the time there actually was a strategy that it actually was happening, that if a young person was convicted of an offence, that their parents would be, it can't have been that they were forced to have parenting education, but they were certainly strongly encouraged, I believe. These parenting classes did exist, and we were making material for them. And so we did get grants from different government bodies over several years. We made films about supporting bereaved children, because a lot of young offenders, it turned out, had lost a parent when they were young. And we made films for parents of teenagers, because notoriously parents and teenagers sometimes have trouble communicating with each other.
Yes.
We've all been there on either side of that generation gap, sometimes twice. So, yeah.
And the film you asked us to watch was it was very light-hearted, it was jovial, but obviously there was teeth to what it was saying, and it sounds like you're inspired by that. So it was an interesting contrast to contrast isn't the right word, but it was an interesting compliment to the previous one. That's right, or augmentation or something like that. And how that works.
Yeah, and again, when we were doing the research for that film, we went to sources that we thought the maximum number of people would be able to recognise where the incidents in our film are coming from. We spoke to community constables. Wow. We spoke to various kinds of community organisations working with families at the very sharpest end of society, and building on the experience of ourselves and our friends. We also, collected anecdotes and material about teenagers, and we also looked up the psychology and medical material about teenagers and what that meant. I think some of us were raising teenagers ourselves at that point in time, and we wanted to. I think our main concern was not to be looking at teenagers as the problem, but to sort of be as even-handed as possible. Yeah. About, teenagers might have strange interests, but if you're a teenager looking at the average parent, they might look as if they've got some strange interests as well, And we were aware that, you might have criticisms of what your teenager's doing, but your teenager also has criticisms of what you're doing, and just sort of trying to facilitate conversations, really. And, passing on a few golden tips, like never use the word no when speaking to a teenager. Just things like that. And, it was fun to do.
Yeah. It's about so many different things. I mean, it's so many different things. So I think that balance between the adults or that generation gap, mapping both sides of that generation gap is successful in the way that it shows the a potential set of fractious relationships around communication and the value of listening and what children need. It's never too late to build bridges, what it means to become an adult. So kind of articulating that kind of
but also, isn't this also one of the classic wonders of animation that we say to everybody? Using animation, you can show different sides of the same question. That is one of animation's great strengths, to show different sides of the same question. Different points of view.
Yeah.
Only because we're running out of time, we need to move on to the final part of the story, which is, I guess, the last 20 years. So another impossible question from me. It's my thing on the podcast. But yeah, could you tell us, I guess, or get us to the point where what the workshop's doing now or in the last few years? And there's a particular film that we'd love to talk about because we watched it, and I mean, this kind of watercolor wonder of They Call Us Maids, 2015, I believe. So if you could tell us a little bit about that movie, but also kind of tell us, what
So it was 10 years.
what
So
the
that's
workshop,
10 years, isn't it? The last 10 years.
What Leeds Animation Workshop is now.
Okay, well, I suppose again the story of the last 10 years again starts with a change in the funding scene. So all those governmental and international governmental film funds that used to exist, or non-film funds, just any kind of funds that used to exist, they all had dried up pretty much by the end of 2011. And so, although, I mean, we'd had a team of 5 of us that worked on all the workshop's films for 20 or 30 years. And at this point, it was like Christmas Eve 2011 when a lottery application had got to the final stage and was turned down, and everybody else, and when we met again at New Year, everybody else said, well, that's it, let's just pack up. We had this little building that we got from it with a BFI grant in the early 80s, and we'd been there ever since, and everybody said, oh, let's just sell up and divvy up the proceeds, and because we didn't have, there'd been quite a lot of times when we'd been working for little or no wages, and there was nobody had a pension fund or anything like that, so people said, oh, let's sell the house and call it the pension fund and make our way. But I wanted to keep on making films and distributing. People were still using our films, so we have kept going, but just on a much tighter budget, stroke non-existent budget a lot of the time. We can pay the electricity bills because occasionally people screen our films or buy copies. The films are all for sale.
Yes. And where are they for sale? On the website?
Yes, you can go to our website, www.leedsanimation.org.uk, and get in touch. But yeah, so we were kind of very much from hand to mouth, distributing the films we've made already, doing occasional bits of experimentation, saying yes to everybody who said, oh, can I just come and use the studio for a bit or whatever. Yeah. And then somebody asked us to do some workshops with a group of migrant domestic workers in Leeds, who are mainly women from the Philippines who'd arrived in this country and were working in the houses of people around us in Yorkshire. And so these women would come to these workshops, lots of nice, giggly, smiley ladies chattering away, bringing sweeties and having a lovely time, and they would come and do animation with us, and some of the things that they wanted to animate were telling their story of what their day was like or something like that. But after a few weeks of this, they said, animation takes a really long time, doesn't it? And, we need more time to just sort of talk to each other because we only get one day off a week, and it's, and actually, could you make a film to tell our story? And so the people that were facilitating the workshops, an organisation in Leeds called Pavilion, and started off as a women's photography organisation. they managed to raise a tiny amount of funding. We thought, and so we said, we might be able to just about scrape together a storyboard with that. And we did a little bit of crowdfunding, and we worked with these migrant domestic workers. They were mainly women from the Philippines, but they included women from Africa and South Asia as well. And they became our friends very quickly, and it had taken us a long time to find out their story. As I say, you know, they all seemed very, very happy, smiley people. Gradually we found out their stories were often stories of terrible exploitation and abuse. And they often talked about the problems they were having with visas and things like that, and we didn't have a clue what they were talking about. It took us about 18 months to find out their stories. But when we did find out their stories, we found out they all had the same story.
Yeah.
And we found out that through animation we could tell it in 7 minutes. The story that it had taken us a year and a half to find out. Yeah. And yeah, we worked with them over a long time. We still work with them. You know, we're very privileged to have their friendship and, you know, solidarity. And I recommend their cause to everybody. You know, they're still trying to get the rights to have a permanent stay visa, because when the story basically, to cut it very, very short, is women in countries like the Philippines or North Africa living in poverty for all kinds of historical reasons, see Crops and Roberts above. They will often, to earn enough money to feed their families, will go to a work agency. So, well, to get proper money, you actually need to work abroad. So if you want to work somewhere where the agency fee will be taken automatically from your first few months' wages, then where you will need to go is somewhere like Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or somewhere like that. So they end up in employment situations that are often very, very problematic, and in a country where it is not possible to run away.
Sure.
You know, if they ran away, they would be extremely visible. They would be breaking the law just by being there. They'd be breaking the law by not being veiled sufficiently or something like that. And, you know, it's very hot and they wouldn't have anything to eat. So, however, their employers, in a lot of cases, will find occasion to come to the UK or another country in Western Europe for work or for a holiday or whatever. And they will take the domestic workers with them. In the same way as they'll take their towels, you know, to facilitate their life there. And in the UK, it's more possible to escape. That is why this organisation exists, is because it's a lot of runaways and escapers from oppressive situations, and they campaign brilliantly for changes in the law. They give each other support in finding better jobs and so on. And yeah, so that's the story of They Call Us Maids, the domestic workers story.
Yeah. we won't say very much about it because we're running out of time. My 2 cents on it is that it's told through these watercolours, and it gives the story, the people telling the story, such I don't know what the right beauty, dignity, point. There's this kind of real richness to the texture of the movie, just on an aesthetic level, that I would very much encourage people to find and seek out, because it's such a beautiful way of telling that story that has so much hostility and degradation to it, that is told with this kind of dignity through the way it's filmed.
And the layering as well. I've written you, because you mentioned it, about that you found out that these stories were the same. And this is what's, all our stories are the same. This kind of layering that works really well with watercolors. This kind of painterly looseness as these drawings get, as these paintings kind of come to fruition. And unlike us that have not managed to do justice to Leeds Animation Workshop in an hour and whatever, in 7 minutes you have this kind of tale that ends with the sort of I guess scenes of celebration in the broadest sense, but. The sort of justice for domestic workers. So I don't really know what else to say other than thank you for taking us through all of these examples, but also you've mentioned so many others that listeners can go out and check and we'll link to.
And just to make sure people are aware, because if they've been hopefully inspired by this story that you've been telling us and either didn't know your work and want to see some of it or support the organisation in any way, there's the leedsanimation.org.uk.
Yep.
Is there any other way they can help support you to make more movies or get the more money out of the ones that are already in existence so that you can make more movies?
Please buy our films from us, hire our films from us.
Yep.
We're still going, and we hope to keep going for a while longer.
Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. You can, if you've been listening to some noises in the background or heard some echoes, we're still at the Animation Studies Conference, Society of Animation Studies. You can find more about the Society of Animation Studies at animationstudies.org, and thanks to them for their help and support in allowing us to talk to people like Terry. So thank you. We're at fantasy-animation.org, as well as social media at Fan and In Research. Find us there. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Bye.